The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
They may be drinkers, Robin, but they're also human beings.
Hell yeah, let's get Stinko.
This is the Giles and the Goalie podcast as part of the Zone Coverage Podcast Network. With your hosts, Giles Farrell and Ben Remington.
Welcome to the Giles and the Goalie podcast. We are back again. It feels like our schedule is just kind of going out of sorts, especially after the weekend when we recorded with Russo on Saturday. But I don't know, maybe it's just me being weird.
No, I think also at the same time, during this whole quarantine, there's like no such thing as days anymore. So right. I think that kind of adds into it a little bit because like we used to record on Sundays, and then this past season, basically we've done Mondays. And then once quarantine hit, it's been kind of a free-for-all. So. Right.
That is the voice of Ben Remington, and I am Giles Farrell.
Hello.
Anything new with you going on? I mean, it's gotten hot outside.
Not really. I may be actually back to working at some point this month.
Woo!
May being the operative word there, and month being the operative word there. Certainly not anytime soon, but we'll see. That'll be fun because it'll be kind of nice to not wear pajamas all day again, and we'll see how that goes. But that's the excitement that is on my end.
Oh, how I've missed sitting in your office.
Yeah, it's gonna be weird. I'll be, not one of the first people back because obviously there is people there still this whole time. But right. It's still gonna be, I think, a rather empty-ish offense. Even if I do come back, because me being a manager, I'll be ahead of a few folks. But it's going to be different. That's for sure.
Yeah, I worry about your stack of emails that you have waiting for you.
Well, I think this is how it works because I was furloughed. So for all intents and purposes in the system, I was fired. So what happens then is your boss gets your emails. So my boss has been getting all the emails that would go to me otherwise, I think is the case. And most of those folks, since I took over, my boss is promoted and I took his spot. So most of those folks know him already anyway. So I should be fine. I might just ignore him and just play the pandemic card.
Good.
Just be like, email. I didn't see an email. I was furloughed. Sorry.
Select all, delete. There you go. Perfect.
Pretty much it, yeah. Yeah, I don't even know if honestly, with my account like basically shut down on our company site, I don't even know if I have been if they're even in an inbox or if they just got I think they just got auto rejected right back to them.
I'll check. I'll try and hack them.
Yeah, try
see
to
what I
email
can
me
find
today
out.
and see
I'm on the
what
inside.
happens. It's not like I can check it. So yeah, you're still employed. So
for those not aware, Ben and I actually work in the same office, same company. So that's why I referenced sitting in his office and whatnot. I just don't go visit him on a whim at work all the time. So,
right.
For our new listeners who are returning to our show after listening to the pod over the weekend with Michael Russo, welcome. We hope you find this podcast to be otherwise fine. If you like the product, please smash that subscribe button and leave us a rating if you're an iTunes listener. Let's dive into some news and some Minnesota Wild topics. It's been a while. First newsworthy thing came Tuesday afternoon, or Tuesday morning, I should say, excuse me. The NHL, all 31 teams released their Masterton Trophy nominees. The Minnesota Wild representative was Alex Stalock, the seemingly goaltender who risen up this past season to help the Wild get to the spot where they are now, which is in the play-in series for the resumption of the NHL season. Without Al, the season would have been lost a long time ago. But a little more from the release. Oh, just a bunch of stats. So never mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice story, and the Masterton is essentially comeback player of the year. They have in other sports, but Stalock's a nice story. If I were a Stalock fan or a big Wild fan, I wouldn't expect him to win, certainly, because there's other comeback stories that are probably a little bit more, more exciting and a little bit more dramatic. I mean, like we mentioned before we started, every team gets one. So
Right.
Unfortunately, it's not that special.
Well, then they shortened the list to 3 nominees for when the actual award show happens.
Right.
I didn't take
I
a
would be
good look at
surprised if he was
I didn't
there.
take a good look at the list because you can typically, pick out about 3, 4, 5 even worthy
Yeah.
nominees of the award, but I didn't. I should have done that because that would make
Yep.
for a good podcast.
And this is
But-
the same award Devin Dubnyk won in his first season with the Wild. But his comeback was a little bit more dramatic. I mean, he literally went from a first-round pick with the Oilers, and that went about as well as you would expect for a goalie with the Oilers lately. And he was sent all the way down to the minors, and came back in one season essentially. I mean, he was traded and then I think released and picked up in the minors, and then signed with Arizona and was traded to the Wild and ended up being a Vezina candidate. So when he won it, it was a little bit more emphatic of a comeback, and a little bit, he came from, he had fallen a little bit further. Alex Stalock is a nice story, but again,
Right.
don't get your hopes up.
I don't expect him to be a finalist.
Right.
And then the other newsworthy thing from the Minnesota Wild here in the last couple days was Matt Dumba was part of a group of NHL players that formed the Hockey Diversity Alliance. And he's actually, as we record right now, Matt Dumba looks like he's on a media call with those who cover the Wild, except us, for this.
The ones who are legally allowed to cover the Wild.
Right.
Not us.
And it's a very noteworthy and a plausible thing here. I'm just pulling up the list of other players. I know Evander Kane was part of that. Joel Ward.
Wayne Simmons, I know. Akeem Alou, who had a pretty nasty story that he went public with a little while ago about some discrimination he dealt with. So.
Right. Trevor Daley of the Red Wings. Chris Stewart, former Wild.
Yep.
Chris Stewart. And Joel Ward. We already mentioned him. So that's the group, and obviously, hopefully, some good can be done by having this now. And I'm honestly surprised it took this long for a group like this to happen with the NHL, but it is the NHL, so I'm excited. So I good for them, and I hope, like I said, they have some good come of that. So that is. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I think it's a great thing. I've been in hockey locker rooms, and obviously with not even predominantly, but like a 95+% of white players. There's going to be some things that are said and done that aren't cool, and I think that's just kind of it's changing the culture to make those things not okay in a locker room or out on the ice, especially. We'll see where they go with this, but obviously, they have basically everybody's support as they should, and so it'll be interesting to see what they do with getting a platform, and hopefully, like we've been so critical of the NHL, and it's very easy to see the NHL fumbling this, but hopefully this is something where the NHL allows them to let their voices be heard and allows them to be involved in some things that are part of making that positive change.
Right. So that was the news from the last couple days. And now on to some podcast topics du jour. The first of which is I wanted to follow up a little bit on something that Russo brought up on our last podcast, which was with him, where he talked about possibly throwing Kaapo in the Wild goal in their 5-game play-in series against the Vancouver Canucks. And I thought that is a very fascinating thing to maybe go on a little bit about. Do you agree with that? Just throw them in there, feed them to the wolves, or do you go the route of give, Stalock or Dubnyk, your proven veterans, the shot?
I certainly understand where Russo's coming from, and I'm kind of the mindset of the Wild don't really have much of a shot in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong, they could absolutely beat the Canucks in the first round. I think that series will be very good. At least I hope it will be. So I'm not saying that they're dead to rights on the first series, but I don't know. I get what Russo is getting at, and it's certainly a good idea to kind of see what you have. I don't see it happening in a playoff type situation. That's a lot to throw a kid who's spent virtually the entire season in Iowa to shove him right into the NHL playoffs. And I think as good as Stalock was playing at the end of the season, I don't know how you bench him. Granted, it's been, it'll be 3-4 months by that point since he was on that hot streak, but I think you at least give him a couple of games. And if Stalock gets worked over pretty hard in the first 2 games, yeah, throw Kahkonen out there for the 3rd game, see what happens. But I would still start the series with Stalock. I don't think giving Kaapo Kahkonen, let's just say theoretically 3 to 5 games if they don't win the series. I don't know that does a whole lot for you in determining his future, especially in such a weird situation that this is. However, I'm on the same page with Mike as far as seeing what you got in him, but I would do it next season. And we've talked about this. I'm kind of in favor of buying out Devin Dubnyk because it's really affordable, quite frankly. And I would, and you did it too when we did the GM episode with using Cap Friendly. I would see what you have in Kahkonen. Certainly going after a bigger name free agent goalie this offseason would be tempting. But if that's a little bit rich for your blood, which I totally understand, especially a guy like Robin Lehner is going to command a pretty decent contract, I totally am with giving Kahkonen a very extended look next season. If not, just kind of riding him until you can't anymore, or seeing if he sinks or swims. So I'm with Russo. I just don't know that you would do it for this playoff run. I think it's not going to show you a whole lot anyway. So I don't know why you would bother.
Well, I think there's, like you brought it up, there's 2 ways you can go with this here. And, the one of which is you throw him to the wolves, you let him be in the goal, and the other is you don't and you wait until probably next season, which you probably give him that shot. Mm-hmm. I myself would go with Kahkonen in the playoff series, and here's why. You are playing with house money at this point. I'm sorry. I don't think the Wild were going to make the playoffs. I know they did well enough to get back into the chase, but they still had a lot of ground to make up. And as good as he was playing, it was hard to see Alex Stalock maintaining the level he was at. Because it was such an outlier of his career numbers.
Right.
So now you're off for probably by the time they actually drop the puck, it'll be closer to 5 months since they played. Nobody is in any kind of rhythm or whatnot. It's all going to be, straight talent at that point. Nobody's on an insane heater. Right. So I think you have to play your most talented. And so I'm not sure if, Kahkonen is more talented than Dubnyk, but given his numbers this past season, I think it's worth doing. And honestly, if you can get a shred of decent goaltending in that 5-game series, you have to like the Wild's odds, because let me tell you, since here in the last, little bit, I've gotten back into hockey and, doing writing and whatnot. And I've spent a lot of time on evolving hockey, and I cannot stress enough how good the Wild defense was this last season and how horrid goaltending was. So a shred, any kind of decent, anywhere close to average goaltending, and I think the Wild have a real shot to win that series. So I think you have to go with Kahkonen, especially, he has probably the most potential out of the Wild goaltenders to do very well at this
to
juncture.
steal a series. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I can also see the other logic in the fact that, you go with Stalock, and the guy that basically put you in that position. I wrote about him, a little while back as being a Wild MVP candidate this year because he essentially pulled this team out of the sewer when it was almost left for dead. And I think it was November when Dubnyk originally left the team. And it can't be understated how much Stalock saved this season, and he could really do it again. So I can see the argument for that. It's just my personal preference is to go with Kaapo Kahkonen.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't think, I think like you said, you're playing with house money, being in on one of those 24 teams. So there's really not much to lose, and again, the Wild are going to be pretty low on in the odds of winning this entire playoffs. So you might as well. So I don't think that they can go wrong with it. I just don't. Yeah, I think Evason will probably appreciate Stalock for what he did for the end of that season, and the fact they were even in contention at all, and the fact they even made this top 24 was because of Stalock's play down the stretch, along with obviously Kevin Fiala. But I think that he sticks with his guy. Especially if it's a short series against Vancouver. He wants to win that series because I think winning that series, and I don't know if you agree necessarily, but I think that kind of secures his job for next year if he wins his playoff series. If he doesn't, I'm not saying he won't be back next year because it's very possible he could be, but I think winning it almost guarantees it. Don't you?
I would say actually, like to go on that a little bit, I would say anything outside of a series sweep, and I feel like Dean Evason's going to be the guy next year.
Okay.
And I don't know what the parameters would be of his contract, but just given how short the off season's going to be and other things that Bill Guerin needs to do, like it seems like Dean Evason is going to be the guy behind the bench next season, and they'll probably lock him into a contract 2 or 3 years or something like that. But I gotta think he at least gets a look next year, and and who knows? Like the players did respond really well, so I gotta think, given how they were playing before the pause happened and what kind of offense the team was getting from guys like Kevin Fiala, it just seems like a thing you don't want to mess with right now.
Sure.
So
that's fair.
That's my thought. But and going back to the goaltending, it probably will be Stalock in the goal, and if things go bad, then it's probably going to be Devin Dubnyk. He'll get a look, I would imagine. So if I had to make a power ranking of Wild goaltenders or a depth chart for their playoff series, it's Stalock, Dubnyk, Kahkonen. But yes. I would probably flip that around. So.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I think it's also interesting for Dubnyk too because, like I said, he's a very, very prime buyout candidate, and so this could be an opportunity for him to show that he should be on the team next season. Because if you don't see Devin Dubnyk for 1 minute in these playoffs, do you know what you have in him next season? And I guess even if he does play a game, I don't think it tells you much anyway. But I mean, it's really tough to judge Devin Dubnyk on his body of work this season right now because it's such a fractured season for him, and obviously he dealt with some family stuff, which was obviously terrible, and your heart goes out to the guy, but it just kind of doesn't really give you a great picture of where his game is at right now. So you can make the same argument for him that you can make for Kahkonen. It's like, Stalock's job on the team next year is all but locked in. But Dubnyk or Kahkonen, I mean, you really don't know who's going to be the other goalie for the Wild next season.
Right. No, absolutely. It's there's a lot of pucks in the air essentially. So so the other thing I wanted to talk about on this podcast, and I don't know where you stand on this. I know I brought it up yesterday, so I'm hopeful you go one way with this, but I can't remember if Mike talked about this on the podcast or not, because he did cover a lot of ground. I give him a lot of credit. He did a lot of different things on that show. So if you didn't see on Monday for zone coverage, I wrote about Jonas Brody and an argument for Jonas Brody giving a contract extension, which was a piggyback off of one of the moves I made when we played GM for 2020-2021.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has me thinking for Wednesday, and I'm going to write about, is arguing a extension for Marcus Foligno, which is another thing Mike has been kind of hinting at for a little bit. If you listen to enough of his shows and podcasts, and so I went into Evolving Wild, and I looked at the numbers and stuff, and I'm also with the eye test alone, my impressions of Marcus Foligno since he's been here have been, he's exceeded them. I really didn't expect much of him when he came over from Buffalo, and just about every at least once a month, I always just watch and I just go, dang, like this guy was such a decent acquisition that I don't think we give enough credit for. And so I am going to, well, first, what do you think on giving Marcus Foligno an extension? Because the Evolving Wild projections, they have it at, if I remember right, it was like a 3-year deal in the neighborhood of, I think it was like $3 million. I could be wrong on that. I don't have them in front of me, but it wasn't terrible, and that's something like Russo had been hinting at. So what do you think? Should they do that, or should they try to move on?
It's a bitter pill for me to swallow, because I've been a Foligno hater kind of since day one, because I didn't think he brought that much. But he certainly has proved himself to be a very, very good defender. He still doesn't bring a lot to the offensive side of the puck, but that's okay, because his defense has been so good. He's been such a staple in that bottom six as really a lockdown defensive type that I think there's very good arguments to be made for extending him. Also, a good argument to maybe extending him is that you didn't trade him this past year. They had all the reason in the world to deal Foligno at the deadline. He's having a pretty good year, and if you look into advanced metrics like we do frequently, he's having a really good year from a defensive standpoint. So I think just the fact that they didn't trade him kind of tells you that they want to keep him around. It's not like he's super old. I think that he can stick around for quite a few more years and again, be that kind of bottom six shutdown staple. So I'm for it. I'm fine with it, especially 3 years, $3 million. I mean, that's really, you're not that's not really wild and crazy in the NHL. His last deal, I want to say, was like 4 years, 2.75 mil or something like that, or no, maybe it was like 3.85 mil, something like that. So Luckily he doesn't have tremendous offensive production, which kind of keeps his cap hit down a little bit.
It's still a decent production for a fourth liner.
Oh yeah,
I do give him credit for that.
Just saying, he's not going to command $5, $6, $7 million a year because he doesn't put up a whole lot of points. But again, that's fine, and that allows you to get him at a reasonable deal for a bottom six guy. I'm for it. I'm fine with that. If not, maybe there is something on the trade market for him. It's tough because this off season is going to be so weird, especially since it's going to happen in like October, and November. So we'll see what happens, but. Yeah, I'm totally for it.
So I I'm kind of shocked you went that way. That kind of blew my mind a little bit, but
I'm a changed man, Giles. We all can adapt and learn.
yeah. I'm gonna argue for this extension. And as you said, he doesn't have much offense, but honestly, for a fourth liner and what Minnesota Wild fans have had to watch from fourth liners over the last decade, I mean, we've had to sit through, Darryl Powell and Chris Porter, and
God.
not to. I like the guy Chris Stewart, but the player wasn't all there. So it just, we had that, and there's so many other guys you could rattle off here, but they found a guy who's comfortable in a bottom six role like Foligno, and he has decent offensive production for the time he gets, and by all accords, he's a good leader, which he seems to be kind of a clubhouse favorite,
Right.
perhaps to be the next Wild captain, which obviously something a guy like Bill Guerin will greatly value. But his biggest caveat is that, as you said, he's so good defensively. And if you look at Evolving Hockey's expected goals against metric, if you sort out players in the last, I took the last 2 years, expected goals against per 60 minutes, Marcus Foligno is the best forward in the NHL in that regard. He was the best last season, and then he's fourth this season in that category. So still over the last 2 years, he's been so good defensively, and I can't stress that enough. And if, again, as I kind of argued in the Brodin article, if the Wild do go with Dean Evason, which we just talked about, they probably will, and they're going to be a little more up-tempo, creative in the offensive end. You need a few players around like Foligno who are very, very smart defensively, and so I can't stress that enough. And especially if you give him a deal like the evolving Wild guys have carved out, which was, like I said, like 3 years, $3 million, I believe, on the cap hit per year. I think that's something the Wild should do, even though they have a flux of forwards on the roster and coming in. But I think at this point, Foligno's a guy who's proven his worth to stick around. And we have backtracked so far on this podcast.
Right.
It was only at the trade deadline we were championing a trade for Marcus Foligno because of his value, and now here we are, just weeks later. I
think in the trade deadline, both of us realized he was a good defensive player.
Well, right. We've
but
known that's not.
It was about maximizing the value of the player. I think was what we were arguing for. So
right.
It's not like we were flat earthers 3 months ago.
Right. It's not like we've it's not like we've gone from being vaxxers to anti-vaxxers in the couple months.
Same thing.
So yeah.
Well, actually, you know what? If anything's going to happen with this pandemic, it's going to turn anti-vaxxers into vaxxers in 3 months. So
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. They're just going to dig in.
That's a slippery slope.
Yeah, true. Fair enough.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Actually, if I may point this out, second on the expected goals against for forwards in the last 2 years, Joel Eriksson-Ek.
Oh wow! I knew he was good defensively. I didn't know that he was, at that elite level.
This is probably going to spark me to dig a little deeper. First of all, shout out to Evolving Hockey and the Evolving Wild guys for all the work they do, because
they're fantastic.
Good Lord, I just in the last couple of days, I've spent hours on the site. Hours. I am just deeply lost in these hockey stats. So yeah, I know, call me a nerd, but I also learned Max Pacioretty was insanely good this last year, as I tweeted out last night. Oh,
interesting.
Just pull up his RAPM chart. Just look at it. It's beautiful.
Hmm.
All across the board. I'll send it to you later.
Sure.
Yeah, that's just one of the few things I've learned in my my studies. So shout out to them. And boy, we had like a doomsday scenario in a group chat at our zone coverage Wild team, where it's like, imagine if somebody hired the evolving Wild guys and
Oh.
the site was shut down. That's just a crippling blow.
Well, that already happened once when when War on Ice was, essentially shut down by the Wild.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't shut down, but the original folks handed it off to some folks that basically ended up shutting it down not very soon thereafter. So,
Right.
they're not very long thereafter.
They've come up with some more like innovative things, like those charts I spoke of, and goals above replacement, and then like the thing that I find probably like most useful, like out of if I had to pick one, is their contract projections, because so much data pours into that, and it's just so valuable to like somebody like me, who, if you're trying to like look at who the Wild could sign and this and that, like, okay, this player is going to cost somewhere in the vicinity of this many years and this many dollars on the cap every year. Like,
Right.
that's basically what they're saying, and that's extremely valuable.
Yeah, it kind of just goes to show you how archaic the NHL is, because the Twins have been at it or the Evolving Wild Twins rather, have been at it for what,
Just a couple of years.
3 seasons now?
Yeah.
I think 3 seasons.
Half of our podcast life.
Right. Like, how have they not been hired? You know what I mean? Like, it just goes to show how, I don't know even know what the word is, dumb, I guess would be one, but how the NHL, like, how you haven't hired him, or either of them, both of them. Like, the Wild very infamously dismantled their analytics staff,
right?
And Seattle's been scooping up everybody,
right.
Including the gal Alex that the Wild let go.
Yep.
Yeah, if you're Bill Guerin, all you got to do is take a look at their website once, and I don't know how you don't hire those guys.
Right, especially like we've talked about this with the tracking data that'll come in. It was supposed to be in the playoffs, but now that got pushed back, so I'm not sure when that's coming in.
Right.
But once
you have that kind of info, my God.
Once they have player tracking data, then you need bright minds leading your analytics department. And of course, like, this data will never be made available to the public. So
no, but if with what the Twins do with the crap that the NHL makes available, it's decent data, but there's a lot to be desired there, as I'm sure they'll tell you. What they could do with actual tracking data, like they're talking about doing, just mind-boggling, literally.
Yeah. So, summary of all that, shout out to Evolving Hockey and all their work. So, oh boy, I'm just seeing if there's anything else we need to rant about. Otherwise, we can maybe just call it a show. I don't know why I'm looking at NHL.com for news. I guess something newsy in the last week from the league was that the NHL is going to reseed the teams in the playoffs after each round.
I saw that.
Do you agree with that?
I understand it, yeah, because especially when you've got an expanded playoff like this, like, you've got 12 seeds on each side. So let's just say the 12th seed upsets the 5th seed, and if you didn't reseed, then you've got the 12th seed playing the 4th seed instead of the 12th seed playing the 1st seed, which is how it should be.
Right.
So I totally get it. It's a little bit weird, and it's not like they're worried about ruining everybody's bracket like the NCAA or anything like that. So it makes sense for having expanded the playoffs this much. It totally makes sense.
Yeah. No, I'm in favor of it. I'm surprised they went as far as what they did. I just assumed, like, if they were going to reseed, they would just reseed after the play-in rounds and then just set the bracket and then let it go like usual. But
yeah, I think they realize there could be a Cinderella team with this because it's such a weird situation and nobody has any momentum right now. Anything could happen.
Right. All right. So that was it. Still nothing on the league potentially returning to play. They've got the format, but we don't really have a date. Like, players are now skating with each other at team facilities, which is a step towards returning. But we'll see how that goes. So there's still a lot more to be done.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think we can probably call it a show here.
Sure.
Any last words?
One little thing I wanted to touch on. It was encouraging when we talked to Mike that he, because he alluded to how much he knows and can't say, and how much he knows and can't write. And so he basically said, read between the lines on a lot of things he writes. And then he literally, a sentence later made mention to how positive he's been about the Kirill Kaprizov situation. So I think for Wild fans, there's something definitely to read into because Mike literally told you to read into it. So I think that was reassuring a little bit in that he obviously knows something, who knows how much, and obviously anything could still happen, but he seems like, he alluded to a lot of positivity around the Kaprizov situation. So I think that if there was one really fun takeaway or one really nice takeaway for Wild fans from that show with Mike was that he sounded like, he couldn't say obviously, and I'm sure there's a good reason for that, but he sounded positive about Kaprizov when we finally got around to asking him.
Yeah. After the show, we actually hung out. We had a small gathering of friends for Roz's birthday, and we sat there for a few minutes and we tried to play a percentage of how much things he actually puts out there and what he can't say. It's very one-sided.
Yeah, I mean, God, it's got to be like 50,
right.
It's up there, just the stuff that he knows and the people that he knows in the game is just incredible. So, that was one of my biggest takeaways from our interview with him.
Yeah, and definitely was preaching to the choir here when he said the Wild should continue to build down the middle and in goal. That is, that's the gospel to me.
Right. I've almost gotten tired of saying it. We've talked about it so much.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a fun show. If you haven't listened, go back, check it out. But based on the ratings, you probably have. So that will do it for us. We'll probably be back not till next week now. We'll just go on a little week off here and regroup, and we'll come back with another fantastic episode of the Giles and the Goalie podcast. You can follow Ben and I on Twitter at Ben Remington, at Giles Farrell. The podcast Twitter is at GATG Wild Podcast. You can also find all of our shows on zonecoverage.com/wild, in addition to all of our written works, zonecoverage.com/wild. Also, you can find the show on SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, Spotify, and of course iTunes. And if you do listen via iTunes, please subscribe and leave us a rating. That does help us a lot. And that will wrap it up for us, and we'll chat with you again next week.
Later.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Gill and the Goaltender podcast.
That's not resiliency. You're making it sound like we're good. That's all. I'm done.